Welcome back to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm Joey Dwyer, and we've got one of college basketball's best media personalities with us, Terrence Oglesby, former Clemson star. Terrence, just tell us about all your gigs. I want you to completely articulate what you do.
You want me to run them down?
Yeah, run them all down.
I'll run them down. Do pre-game shows and post-game shows for the Charlotte Hornets. So I do that for all their home games. And then I also do work for the Field of 68 and do some after dark stuff, part of the DTF podcast with John Fanton, Rob Doster. And then I'm one of the odd ones in that I'm under contract with both Fox, ESPN, and CBS to do games for every network. So I'm one of those weird guys that just kind of float around wherever they give me games. And I'm excited to see what Vanderbilt's got cooking because I know a lot of those guys on that staff. Rick Ray was at Clemson right after I left school, and then I worked with Matt Buckland and John Sanderson was my strength coach at Clemson. So I'm hoping those guys do well, and it looks like they've got some pieces. So it's pretty exciting for people in Vanderbilt country.
For sure. I think Vanderbilt's more of a talking point this year than they have been in the past. Obviously, picked 16th in the SEC preseason poll. Tio and I talked at SEC Media Day. That's actually how I met him and how we set this up. But SEC Media Day wasn't a day that I think Vanderbilt was in the spotlight, but almost feels like they could be a team that makes a little bit of a dark horse push. Is that kind of the sense you get from this program?
I think there's going to be a lot of games where they hit like 12 to 18 threes. And then it's like the people they're playing are like, oh shit, like we're going to have to play behind the eight ball. And I think Bingington's going to be able to draw stuff up for them. Plus, they just beat UAB. They've got guys that can score. Jason Edwards is a bucket. He was a bucket at North Texas. It seemed like every time they played an SEC school on their schedule, like he went nuts. And the only thing that worries me a little bit is he's a little bit on the smaller side. How does that work all season long? You can get it in 1-2 minute glimpses or 1-2 game glimpses. How's it going to have to go for what 18 game season in the SEC? That's not easy. So I'm curious to see how that goes. There's a lot of good players. AJ Hogard can settle people down. He's not like this scoring dynamo, but what he is he's a big guard who can get in the paint. He can find guys on the perimeter. All this shooting that they added. So I'm excited to see how Vanderbilt is.
For sure. I think you look at Jason Edwards as somebody who is different than what they've had in the past. I view him as their most talented off the dribble scorer since Scottie Pippen. Just how do you think that plays in the SEC? Obviously, the shot selection is a little bit of an issue in my mind and the undersized thing, but when you have a scorer that dynamic, feels like you kind of got to get him involved.
Yeah, and you have to pay attention to him constantly. To
Hmm.
me, like that's the biggest thing. Like he attracts so much attention. The guys like, whether it's MJ Collins who can get loose and hit 4 or 5 threes, whether it's Ty Nickel who started at Carolina and went to Virginia Tech, like he's got capabilities for big plays, 12 to 15 points depending on the night. So when you have that focal point, all those other guys can kind of filter around him. Like I said though, small guards, how's that going to work? And I
Hmm.
say that all at the same time, the best guard in the conference is only about 6 feet, and
Right.
that's Mark Sears. So can it work? Yes. Will it work consistently is the question.
And that's kind of my question with the whole roster. They seem like a team that's really high variance to me. They're going to play up and down. They almost remind me of like a Florida slash Alabama type scheme in a sense. And I think that's a little bit difficult to do without a 6'10, 6'11 big, which is what they're working with without Kajani Wright. How is being high variance kind of a blessing and a curse in the SEC to you?
It's because the wins, you can shock some people, but you can also get thumped.
Hmm.
Like that's the biggest problem. Like if you're going to live and die by the three, that can be a little bit that can be worrisome.
Hmm.
But you like the pieces. It's a by committee situation because Jason Edwards, they're going to put some long athletes on him sometimes. It's
Hmm.
going to be difficult for him. But at the same time, like as long as they're moving and playing with pace, which I think that they're going to do because that's what they did at JMU. I think he's going to be able to find creases in the defense. But you look, it's more than just that. Like there's no 6'10, 6'11, but there is like Jalen Carey is not small. He's
Hmm.
not the tallest guy, but he's pretty wide. I mean, like you talked about a couple of different guys on the roster. I like the role player potential around Jason Edwards. Is he going to be able to be that guy from 20, 17 and a half to 22 points a game? Like it's going to be hard to do. And he's going to have to do it while creating for other people. I'm not saying he can't do it. I just feel like the step up in competition, the night to night basis with the athletes that are going to be thrown at him, those other guys are going to have some big nights in order for them to compete. I do think it could be difficult in year one because you're starting to try to change those things around. And let's keep in mind too, Vanderbilt's Vanderbilt. Like you can
Mhm,
take guys, but you can't take anybody.
mhm,
So that's kind of the hang up when it comes to a school like that.
for sure. And I think you probably have better perspective on this being a college player than I would, but I've always kind of felt like Vanderbilt's had to pay the Vanderbilt has sucked for 7 years tax in terms of recruiting to where guys like their pitch, they like the NIL, but they're almost a little weary of, man, I don't know if I can go there and win games, or I don't know if their vision can actually be actualized.
I think there's a part of that that they've stunk for so long. I think there's always new energy and excitement when it's a new coach coming in.
Hmm.
I think while you do get the 7 year, oh no, you also get the bump with the new coach who, won 30 games last year.
Hmm.
So there's that excitement too. I think, one of the bigger things is like you can't sell energy along with the NIL
Hmm.
sometimes. And I know a lot of people are like, well, it doesn't matter. You can just pay them. They'll play in front of an empty place. Not necessarily the case.
Hmm.
Like some kids will take, 25, 30 grand less money to play in front of a packed house. And that's happened. So you have to be able to get those things going. But the good news is for Byington and staff, like once they get things moving in the right direction, Vanderbilt likes basketball.
Hmm.
And like the people in Nashville are very willing to come in and watch games. I mean, it's one of the truly unique environments. Like if you can just get it going,
Hmm.
like then that train can really get on the tracks because there's a lot to sell there. It's Nashville. What is it? Main Street. There's all these different things that like guys are going to love.
Hmm.
Um, to go in conjunction with the NIL, but I think just like the rest of the SEC, Vanderbilt fans, they like basketball. It's not second fiddle to football like the rest of the conference. So it's
Hmm.
one of those things where if you get it going, uh, it could snowball.
For sure. And I kind of look at what your point there about like their only selling point is not NIL. AJ Hogard is a guy that they wouldn't have been able to get if their only selling point was NIL. I don't think that's a guy that comes to Vanderbilt in years past with previous staffs. I think that's a result of kind of the new energy around the program. And maybe it's to do with the practice facility, maybe it's to do with the city, maybe it's to do with the NIL, maybe it's a combination of all those things. But a guy like AJ Hogard, I don't think is the type of caliber of player that they would get in the past.
Oh, really? As far as like a high profile kind of guy,
Yeah, especially a transfer because they got Darius Garland a few years back, but I just don't see them
but
getting a
he was a Nashville kid,
right. And
like
I don't see
that.
them getting a transfer like that, especially in a market like this in years past.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said there. I also feel like Hogard got fired up watching JMU compete in the NCAA tournament. So, they were playing fast, they were getting in gaps, they had shooters around them, around Terrence Edwards, who's now at Louisville. Like they had a lot of these guys that he's like, well, I could fit that system. And so while there is a lot of that, the NIL helps, but Hogard's also looking like I need to have a good year. I need to show people I'm a winning point guard and then that way I can continue playing after this. So, uh, the crazy thing about Hogard is I thought he represented himself well at SEC Media Day. The year before at Big Ten, he kind of stuck his foot in his mouth and he paid for it. And, I think as a result, coming in a little bit more under the radar, he could be a guy that people are like, oh man, this guy can play.
Hmm.
This guy can continue playing. It won't be in the NBA, but he'll have a shot to go and extend his career for a few years, wherever that may be.
Hmm.
And, I think that's a big selling point because you look at what Byington does, he likes to play fast. He lets his guys go within reason. I think that's one of the more interesting things. They've been a top 100 team in tempo ever since been a head coach.
Hmm.
So I think, it's playing style. You get older guys like, sure, they're ready for a check. That all makes sense. But at the same time, it's like, how can I extend my playing career? He saw that system and what Byington did at JMU, and he's thinking, well, I can be a part of that at Vanderbilt.
For sure. I think last year Byington seemed to make an impression on more people, and not to mention Hogard in the opener last year when JMU went to Breslin Center and beat him. I just think he's a guy that maybe made some more national waves. I feel like you guys talked about him a little bit more last year on Field of 68. What were your impressions of Byington last year and now as he takes the job at Vanderbilt?
What? The big thing for me is they attack the rim. He had really good athletes at JMU, and when you look at what they were able to do in the Sun Belt, they they took care of the boards, they shot good percentages, and they had really good athletes around the rim. I'm not sure they have those type of athletes around the rim this year,
Hmm.
but at the same time, if they're playing fast enough with the floor open, they're going to be able to find those spots. I'm curious to see how it goes. I think this roster is a little smaller than what he had at JMU.
Hmm.
Maybe not across the board, but especially around the backcourt. So, how that fares in a league that is a beast. Like the SEC this year is as deep as it's ever been, and every conference says that, and every media day we'll ever go to. But at the same time, I truly believe like they are they are going to be competing every night with every team in the league that probably has one, if not two, like All-America caliber players. Now, will they be that? No, but there's somebody on every roster that you're like, oh man, like that dude's a stud.
Hmm.
And they're going to have to do it as a unit because while there are good players, I'm not sure there's that real stud on that team outside of Jason Edwards, who's about 5'10".
Right. The path to Vanderbilt, I think, is a little different than it has been in the past with the NIL and new practice facility era. Just what does the path to winning at Vanderbilt look like for you in a broad sense?
In a broad sense, like I actually think, you know, college basketball is going to go back to the freshmen next year because
Hmm.
there's going to be less transfers available with the COVID year. So there's just not going to be as many humans out there that are going to be leaving school and all that. Now you'll still have super roster turnovers of 8 to 9 players, and that'll happen on occasion, but I don't think it'll happen all that much. Um, Getting the right type of player that can also keep up academically is a huge part, but a lot of times that's twofold
Hmm.
because if you're able to get that kind of kid in the classroom, typically you can run some really good stuff and they'll be able to retain a lot of information. Sometimes you can't. I mean, look at I'm not going to point out any individual school, but there's guys that have taken academic jobs before that take non-academic quote unquote jobs now, and the guys can't remember plays, so you kind of have to conjure up a different playing style just to kind of facilitate what they're good at, and they're
Hmm.
good in chaos, so you have to let them go. At Vanderbilt, you can understand like, hey, I'm going to get a certain type of kid. uh I think level-headed is a good one. Skill has always been a big one whenever Vanderbilt's been good. I remember back when Stallings was there, whether it was Mario Moore or like some of these guys that were super cerebral players that could shoot the basketball shot with Foster and some of those guys. Like that's what I think about when I think of Vanderbilt. Like supremely skilled, play together, and they can knock down shots. Like broadly, I think that's where you have to go to where in a league where you're playing against super athletes on a nightly basis, sometimes you got to beat them 3-2 as opposed to just matching them up 2 for 2.
For sure. I think the 3-point thing is a huge thing for them, and them hitting 13 threes in the secret scrimmage against UAB is such a huge thing. I think we got a lot more information on that secret scrimmage than we'll get next week against your alma mater when they play Clemson. I don't think much will get out from either side there. It's gonna be a tough Sunday, TO, for
We're
me.
not getting anything out of that.
No, it's gonna be a
Uh,
tough Sunday.
yeah, I can assure you, you won't be getting much information out of that one.
You
Just because they're so tight-lipped over at Clemson, and it's kind of the same way at Vandy too. So
we
I think it got out a little quicker because they played UAB.
yeah, we might as well just watch the NFL slate and just kind of leave it at
Yeah,
that. But
hope for the best. I'll be
right,
able to get you who played well, but that's about it.
right.
No, I think it's two coaching staffs that Brad Brownell, now that Tony Bennett left, I mean, is he the best coach in the ACC?
One of them.
I mean, he's got to be.
Hmm.
He's got to be. So, like, he's been there. This is his 15th year. They just got back from an Elite Eight. He's brought Clemson to a Sweet 16 at a football school where you
Hmm.
might not even be second fiddle. You might be third fiddle because
Right.
baseball's huge at Clemson. So, they're going to be good. Whenever Chase Hunter comes back for a 5th year, who's a really talented kid. Ian Shefflin's a monster. There's 2 guys I've seen in person this year that I think could play in the NFL. One's Ian Shefflin, the other one's Rob Whaley at UNLV. Those are the
Hmm.
2 guys that I'm like, yeah, those guys could play in the NFL. Maybe Jalen Carey, if he wanted to play, left tackle, he could get a couple of he could get some money doing that. But I think that's going to be a good matchup. I do think Clemson's a little more talented.
Hmm.
And a lot of that just has to do with the fact that they've had continuity. They've had guys that have been in the system. And, Chase Hunter's former top 75 kid who stayed 5 years.
Right.
Ian, he's been there for, 3-4 years. So there's this set of and level of expectation at Clemson that is different now than what I think what Vanderbilt's is in year one, where Byington's still trying to install what he likes to do.
And Clemson's coach is finally off the supposed hot seat, which I don't know if
The dude was on a perpetual hot seat.
right.
Like the fact that like he's no longer on a hot seat. Give him a lifetime deal as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, right. I just look at the 13-3 thing from yesterday, and I just think,
You
man,
don't hit 13. Vanderbilt doesn't hit 13 threes. They don't win a game in the SEC.
right.
They're gonna have to hit threes.
And you're going exactly where I'm trying to go with it. I think high variance is the path for this team in year one. Like, you've got to be able to go in and knock down 15 threes and to beat a good team and knock them off when you probably shouldn't, especially with what you have in the front court. Is that a take that you're kind of behind?
Yeah, you're gonna have to hit shots. And when you say high variance, like you're gonna get thumped some games and you're gonna win games you're not supposed to at times. Like you could go in and beat Kentucky if you get hot. You can go in and beat Arkansas if you get hot. But you also can get beat by 40 points. And like at least if that's their direction and how they're going to play, then that's going to be part of the equation. So I think they have the capability of doing that, but it's going to be a pretty difficult slate if they don't hit shots.
Yeah, especially in year one. You just look at last year. I mean, they didn't shoot over 40% in a single game from beyond the arc. So I would expect that to change, but you're never going to win
Oh,
the
it's going to change because I mean, would they return 2 guys?
Yeah, and Tyler
Yeah,
Nickel.
I mean
Yeah,
that's kind of the hardest thing for our job right now. You know what I
right.
mean? Like we're trying to guess like playing style of a coach in a new league at his old place with more talent. Is it going to work in this league? Like
Hmm.
that's kind of the issue. But a few things he did do, they've always boarded, especially on the defensive end of the floor.
Hmm.
And they've also always done well around the rim. I'm well around the rim is going to might be an issue.
Yeah, and they've beat Power Five teams before, which I think is a huge thing and something I look at as a qualification for a coach. I don't know if you kind of look at that as well as you make the jump, but that's something that's encouraging to me. Is not that they just won their league and made the tournament, but they beat Wisconsin, to beat Michigan State, and have beat teams previously as well.
It's big. It's big. I mean, it just tells you that a couple of things. Like he had players,
Hmm.
um, and he plays a style that can beat some of these high major teams. Like it's always a massive step up in competition. You're not playing one-offs against these teams.
Hmm.
You're playing, game. You're in February. You've played 11 straight games in the SEC, and all of a sudden you turn around, you're like, oh crap, I'm 3-8, or oh crap, like we're actually 6-5. Like, and you're still like kind of picking away and picking away. That's kind of where the hard part is when you move up, because you play, Texas on Friday, you have Kentucky on Monday
Hmm.
or Saturday, Tuesday, or you know what I mean? So like the turnaround, the quick fixes, the energy, it's still all there. That's what makes it really hard.
For sure. Before I let you get out of here, obviously we got a little time crunch. I just want to get your general expectation level for Vanderbilt basketball in 2024, 2025. It feels like the league is as good as it's ever been. It's a tough time to come into it, but maybe they're a little bit more well equipped now than they would have been a year or two ago.
Yeah, you know what? I think it's always going to be hard. I haven't picked 14th out of 16,
Mm.
and that doesn't mean to be a shot at Vanderbilt, but that just tells you everything you need to know about the rest of the league. I think there's a legitimate 11 teams that could make the NCAA tournament, and
Mm.
I think there's a legitimate 5 teams that could win the league. Not the obvious Alabama, but the next 5. Like they could all make a run and win the league if all goes well. So I think the depth of the league is unbelievable. And I
Mm.
think it's going to be really tough on a night to night basis to really keep up that level of play when your guards are small. But if they shoot the ball well, you're going to have some games where it's like, well, okay, Vanderbilt's on their way. This is a big upset right now, but these are building blocks for the future for Byington.
For sure. Tio, thank you for taking the time. I think I've always watched you and feel the 68 and have always come away with the thought of like, that's a former player who actually knows about the whole country and is not just a back in my day type of guy. So I appreciate that perspective, and I think
There's
Vanderbilt
not a,
fans.
there's not a whole lot back in my day.
I
I'd be
don't know. I
pulling up
think
from not much. Now, I appreciate you saying that. I work really hard to try to be, you know, cognizant of all the teams because I know there's so many different fan bases that just pay attention to their school. So,
mm,
no, I was a pretty good player, but I've enjoyed doing this even more than I've been a player. So, I appreciate you having me on. I'm gonna try to get up to Nashville this year if it's possible to see those guys, and I'm excited for Vanderbilt to be good again because one of the truly unique venues in
mm,
college basketball, and I think when they're rocking, it's a lot of fun.
for sure. Make sure to stop by the Crow's Nest. I'll eat some Hattie B's with you in the back media room before. But thank you for coming on, man. We'll do it again soon, hopefully.
All right, appreciate.